What is it one book that absolutely changed your life? Probably Redwall because it got me into reading as a child and later writing. I came here to say this or Artemis Fowl. I read out of those books. Also Netflix is making a Redwall movie and I can't put into words how excited I am. Also Harry Potter like most people. But it was cool when I was 11 and the first book came out. And by the time it was no longer cool I was already 4 books deep and I wasn't about to stop haha. Here's hoping the Redwall adaptations are better than the Artemis Fowl movie. Brian Jacks came to my school when I was a child to speak and read a portion of Redwall to us. I was already a huge fan and I felt like such a dummy when he said Matthias's name. I realized I had been pronouncing it wrong in my head the entire time. Matthias instead of Matthias. Doc. Hung my head when he signed my copy. A Brief History of Time. The insanity and complexity of the universe was explained in understandable terms. Bonkers. Hawking was a treasure. Not all pop science is as accessible, interesting, and meaningful as this. Pop science has changed so much over the years and it's filled with sensationalized articles. I love science is notorious for making a crazy statement like new species discovered that will change science forever, and it's just a different kind of shrimp that does the same every other shrimp does. Even IFLS used to be much better. Once upon a time they just shared links to interesting third-party articles, maybe with a bit of a breakdown in the description, and did weekly/monthly recaps of science stories. Now they have a much more clickbaity presentation and mostly link to their own articles that read more like a BuzzFeed article rather than Popsy. By the way guys, if you are enjoying this video so far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It will help us out quite a bit, and if you don't enjoy the videos in the future anymore, you can always unsubscribe. Let's get back to the video. There is a monster at the end of this book. It really led me on a journey to overcome my fears and deeply examine what it means to be a monster. Also, pulling really hard against Grover to turn the pages helped me get buff. Really I was helping Grover face fears he was not ready to face. But we faced them together. One of my earliest memories was listening to this at story hour at the library as a 3-year-old and being absolutely terrified. I was crying by the end and the librarian sat down and talked with me about not needing to be afraid. And then she gave me the book. I was absolutely horrified. Having basically no possessions at that age, getting a gift was a huge deal, and TBH my first thought was great now I can't escape this terrible thing, but the librarian's generosity and investment in me genuinely overcoming my fear just floored me. And so 20 years later I still have the book. Oh my god. I used to bawl at this book. My mother had to bring it to my grandparents' house because I was petrified of it. We'd try again every few weeks, and when I finally got to the end I was like it's just Grover. The Easy Way to Stop Smoking by Alan Kerr. I had zero intention to stop smoking when I started reading that book. To say I was skeptical about it would be an understatement. I was a heavy chain smoker. Smoked more than anyone I knew. But I went cold turkey after I read it 3 years strong. I have not had a single puff since finishing that book. If you smoke, you want to read this book now. I wish I read it earlier. Edit, just wanted to plug r/nosmoke for those who want support or information about stopping smoking. I quit cold turkey with no issues after smoking a pack plus a day for 45 years. Kerr's book is amazing and highly recommended for anyone who wants to quit, along with r/stop smoking. Sounds interesting. I can't imagine what in the world could be said to a smoker that'll make them able to quit cold turkey, but I guess it's in this book. Since this isn't the first time I heard it has that effect. It's really simple. Give people real information to make informed decisions. Nicotine addiction is the least of the problems with regard to quitting. Once that's out of the way, then it's just a matter of understanding the psychological addiction and how easy it is to defeat those two demons. Edit. 31 days. Cravings are occasional and minimal. There's no worse time When I start thinking about it, I just take a deep wheeze-free breath and thank myself for returning to being a non-smoker. Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. The things other people have put into my head, at any rate, do not fit together nicely, are often useless and ugly, are out of proportion with one another, are out of proportion with life as it really is outside my head. Sirens of Titan as a teenager, while listening to the first Ultra Chilled album, was one of my favorite experiences. Ended up buying every Vonnegut book in those cool editions they released in the late 90s with the stylized V. Going to Barnes & Noble to buy my new book with my money from sweeping the movie theater was a great experience. I read Cat's Cradle this past summer. Reading it during a pandemic really hit different. If I were a younger man, I would write a history of human stupidity, and I would climb to the top of Mount McCabe and lie down on my back with my history for a pillow, and I would take from the ground some of the blue-white poison that makes statues of men, and I would make a statue of myself, lying on my back, grinning horribly, and thumbing my nose at you-know-who. That quote cemented my love for him as an author. Dune. Fear is the mind killer. Also, A Wrinkle in Time. Dune for me, as well. I picked it up at a school book sale in 8th grade, 13Y/0, and it blew my mind. I've been reading Michael Crichton for a few years, but Dune was sci-fi on a whole different level. It really opened my eyes to what literature could be. I'm reading Dune now and just haven't caught on to what the big deal is. I'm genuinely trying to understand, because I've heard nothing but great things, but all these terms are confusing to me. I'm a little over 1/3 through, and having difficulty finding the motivation to keep going. Edit. I will say this is the first science fiction novel I've read in over 5 years too. It might be worth it to look up a glossary of Dune terms when you're reading the first book. My copy luckily had a glossary in the back, and I know without it, I would have been super lost. It is incredibly worth it though to finish the book. Most words you will come to understand the meaning of after a while from contextual clues. Morse, the first and only graphic novel to win a Pulitzer Prize. Edit. It is a book about a second-generation survivor of the Holocaust retelling his father's memoirs of the event. This semi-biographic book puts into perspective the whole feeling of absolute terror and give us an insight on the before-after situation. The Jews are portrayed as mouse and the Nazis as cats, elaborating on the whole cat and mouse chase premise, which demonstrates the horrors the Jewish felt. Although it is a graphic novel, its images do really say more than words. It is to this day the only book which has made me cry and feel hurt. It makes the whole subject feel very personal. I absolutely loved Morse. Not because of the graphic stuff described in it, but because of the way it's told. It was honestly a book I was interested in, and I was glad I could read about someone's experience from the Holocaust. Such a great book. The part that sticks out the most for me was the relationship the author had with his parents, which was so clearly suffering the byproduct of attachment injury. When he explained feeling like he could never measure up to his dead brother, especially because the brother died as a toddler, and the line about not knowing what sibling rivalry is because his rival is a ghost, it gets me every time. But the whole book is tragic and beautiful, and the fact it's a true story amplifies the grasp on the heartstrings for me. The Hobbit. As a young child, I had always found reading to be pretty dull. This changed when I was 7 and got my hands on The Hobbit. I realized that it wasn't reading that was boring, I just wasn't reading the right books. The Hobbit started my lifelong love of reading, particularly fantasy and sci-fi, a passion that I'm now following as a writer. Wow, that's pretty good for 7. But I have a similar story. I think I was like 8 or 9 when I started reading Narnia, and it had the same effect on me. The Hobbit is pretty solidly a children's book, but I jumped straight into Lord of the Rings afterwards, and it was a big step that I did struggle with at times. But being challenged was what I needed at that point. I had a joke with my dad that if I didn't know what a word meant, I should assume that it was some variation of valley, eggvale, ravine, dell, glen, glade, gill, dingle, hollow, coombe, nook, etc. Tolkien was very description heavy and, of course, had a pretty broad vocabulary. Where the red fern grows up as a kid. My kid refuses to read Bridge to Terabithia because the cover looks like the cover to Where the Red Fern Grows, and so it's probably sad. He's not wrong. One case where judging a book by its cover is effective. Former bookstore guy here. You absolutely can judge a book by its cover. That's why publishers put a lot of resources into picking the right cover for a book. A good cover means that the publisher has confidence enough in the book to invest in its presentation. A slapdash cover means the publisher decided against making the book a serious investment. Sci-fi and fantasy books have different cover styles than literary fiction. Young adult looks different than middle reader looks different than early reader. Does a book about a musician go in music or in biographies? You can tell by the cover before checking the section code in the computer. Parable of the Sewer by Octavia Butler, an incredible sci-fi book that was written in the 80s and is a mix of apocalypse fiction, socio-political critique and resilience. Completely changed my worldview and put me on the path to sustainable off-grid living, which I'm really grateful for. Edit. I also equally love the sequel Parable of the Talents, and there's an amazing podcast called Octavia's Parables that came out last year which goes through each chapter of the book. I recommend it for anyone thinking about starting the book or rereading it. It's like being in a book club that goes at your own pace. My English professor had this as part of our assigned reading for the semester. It was one of my favorite books of the semester. I have not read the sequel though, and I'm torn on if I want to or not, because I like the way the book ends. Kindred is another great book by the same author, deals with slavery as the protagonist is dragged through time. I definitely recommend reading Parable of the Talents. It contextualizes a lot of the first book, and has a really good ending as well. It's just as tragic and heartbreaking as the first book though. I haven't read Kindred yet, but it's on my list for this year. I'm waiting on the graphic novel of Kindred from the library. I love Octavia Butler. I'm so glad her work is making a comeback. I've read The Parables and Lilith's Brood. I'm also waiting on Wild Seed from the library. So excited to read more of her novels. When I was 13 years old I had a long school bus ride home from school, almost an hour long, and would pass the time by reading. One day I was in the library frantic for something, because I had no book, and picked out an astronomy one that was called From the Big Bang to Planet X by Terence Dickinson, and had a fetching picture of the Andromeda Galaxy on its cover. That book, wow. I was completely enchanted about outer space, and by the time I was done reading it, I knew I wanted to be an astronomer. I remember thinking at the time, how fantastical it was that people could have that job, but anyone who was an astronomer was 13 once and this was a thing you could do, even if you lived in Pittsburgh. Anyway, that was over 20 years ago, and there were many twists and turns along the way, but I'm now 2 years into working as a professional astronomer at Harvard. I just submitted a paper last week on a black hole that ripped apart a star, which was super fun to work on, and I couldn't help but think a lot about how excited 13-year-old me would be to see how it's going. I don't know if she would have believed it. A fellow Pittsburgher in the wild. Congrats on your accomplishments. My uncle's partner is an astronomer down in Florida. Oh, very cool. Lots of money going into astronomy right now in Florida from what I see on the job register, which is interesting. Seems like every year University of Florida is hiring another one. Discrete Mathematics 4th edition. Never wanted to end my life so quickly. Edit. Wow, thanks for the award. I'd read what it means but thanks so. No. What an evil flashback. When in college I took a class that had the textbook element of discrete mathematics. I was doing so bad I dropped the class. Took the class again. Dropped it again. Took the class again. Dropped it again. The 4th time I stuck it out and ended up with a D. My other math classes I could ace them cold, regularly getting the highest score out of the class on the final. I don't know what it was about discrete mathematics that my brain was simply incapable of dealing with. If you're failing at learning discrete mathematics, keep trying. Because it's not continuous. I'm both jealous and scared. I love studying weird branches of math. I'm currently studying multivariable and vector calculus as well as introductory linear algebra, and I love it. But discrete maths? When I struggle with a concept, I really struggle with it, and I think discrete mathematics is the exact type of math class that I would fail. The Long Walk by Stephen King greatly shows the variety of lives and some lessons about the life itself. Came here to say that The Shining introduced me to King's world building. Turns out his books are way better than the movies and TV shows based on them. I've devoured 10 more of his books in the past year. Thank God he keeps pumping them out, because I haven't read a King book that I could put down easily. Made me realize that reading as an adult is fun too. Just bought The Long Walk, thanks for the recommendation. His best movies seem to be based on his non-horror stories. The Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, Stand By Me. Have you gotten into the Dark Tower series? It takes element from a lot of his books and even his real life. Usually I read apocalyptic adventure type books like Fahrenheit 451, 1984, Asimov, The Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno. But one day in school I had the first in the series, and I was hooked. 8 books in total, now 1 to 7. Then they released a book that takes place in between, like books 3 to 4, called Wind Through the Keyhole, which is a story of the protagonist's childhood. I'd still read WTTK last. Flowers for Algernon. I read it as a teenager, and it made me realize that my intelligence was a privilege, and that it didn't make me better than people who are less intelligent than me. In one of Isaac Asimov's essays, he wrote about presenting the author Daniel Keyes with an award for FFA. He told the audience something like, how did he do it? How did Daniel come out of nowhere with such an incredible science fiction story about the human condition? Then Daniel got on stage all humble. If you figure out how I did it, please tell me, so I can do it again. This book, dude. Absolutely incredible. I named my pet rabbit Algernon, partially because of the book, partially for the poet Algernon Swinburne, because my favorite poem is A Garden of Proserpine. Having him in my life was a daily reminder to me that my mind is a gift and education is a privilege. Neuromancer. It somehow gave me hope. Might have been at a low point in my life, I really can't say. But I started collecting books again, reading more, and I put up with way less from people. There's got to be a reason somewhere, so I'm giving credit to William Gibson. I'm planning to get it soon, but its reviews are mixed, from Reddit at least. What do you like about this book? And did you find it hard to read? I've read it about a dozen times. What I love most are the vivid images he paints, and the nuance of the characters. It's the kind of book that each time you read it, you get a different view of the characters or notice a new plot point that you previously missed. I can see why some people might not like it, but personally, I love it. It is a little hard to read in the beginning, because some of the jargon is dense. But at some point it clicked for me, and I realized it was one of the best novels I'd ever read. I can see why some people might not like it, but you have to try it for yourself. The writing is extraordinary, the characters are distinct and engaging, and the plot is compelling. And anyway, it's just cool to read something that literally invented a genre. The Road. I read it before and after becoming a father. Drastically different experiences. And the World According to Garp. I read it when I was a kid, and it was the first novel that made me laugh out loud and come close to crying in the same book. I was wondering if anyone was gonna bring this up. I read it right when it came out and just fell in love with his writing and thought it was a super enthralling read. Finished it in like 2 sittings and then delved into all of his other books. I tried to read it again around the time my son turned 2, and I couldn't stomach it. Took me a month to get 75% of the way through it, and I just gave up. I remember when I read Clan of the Cave Bear by Jane M. Auel. I was about 10 years old, and I had seen the movie a dozen times before I found out it was a book. I devoured it in 2 days. I was hooked on the whole series for decades, and it started my obsession with books. I will read anything, but historical fiction is my favorite, and it started with the Earth's Children series. I adore that whole series. Except the very last book in it sucks. It's more of an archaeological/anthropological dissertation on cave drawings with almost no plot. And the plot that is there is freaking terrible. Infuriating and for some beloved characters. Wait, it is. I gotta read it then. Have to see how the amateur archaeologist writer is doing on that dissertation. There is no last book, well, 2 books. The series ends once they get home in the Plains of Passage. I cannot be convinced otherwise 10 years later, and I'm still so indescribably angry at book 6. Everyone got hit with the idiot stick and the plot was atrocious. Are you me? My 5th grade teacher found me reading Clan of the Cave Bear and called a parent-teacher conference out of concern for the mature subject matter. My cool mom's response, I'm the one who lent it to her. The Stranger by Albert Camus. It was the first time I identified with a character. I was 17, and I had read lots of books by that point, and I could really see myself in Meursault. I read it in school, and we had a discussion after everyone finished the book. I already knew I wasn't exactly normal, but hearing everyone's reactions was eye-opening. He's a monster. He doesn't care about anything or anyone. He doesn't have any empathy. He doesn't feel any emotions and so on. I had already realized that I couldn't say what I was truly thinking in order to blend with everybody else, but that book made me realize that not only would people never understand me, but they would certainly not accept me that way I am, even if I tried to explain the way I think. The Stranger was great for me too. Although, if reading it made you feel more alone like no one else could ever understand how you feel, it is possible for your classmates to understand you as much as they might see you as a monster. The issue that Meursault deals with after he kills the Arab on the beach is that people would rather rationalize their worst demons as inhuman than accept them as part of humanity. Things that society considers morally reprehensible often lead to people vilifying the person rather than the action. Like Meursault realizes on that beach, it doesn't really matter if he pulls the trigger or not. He is just as capable of firing the gun as he is not firing it. There is no moral force in the universe compelling him not to shoot the Arab. Therefore, there is no real reason for people to be morally good or not. It's all a construct made by humans. So, he pulls the trigger, an act of defiance against the idea that he shouldn't kill the Arab just because of some artificial morality created by humans like him. He had no desire to commit murder. He had no real desires at all. But his actions resulted in the death of another human being, which society considers reprehensible. However, Meursault didn't think it mattered much if the man he killed lived or died, just as it didn't matter that he lived or died. At the time of his execution, all he hoped for was that the crowd got a good show out of his death. Because with his revelation about there being no inherent meaning to life, he lacked the fear of death. Lord of the Rings. I first read it in 8th grade when most of my friends were filling out and getting noticed by boys. The only thing noticed about me was that I was tall, terribly skinny, and would disappear sideways. LOTR made me realize that there are whole rich other worlds that exist outside of school, and maybe I was just built more like a self than a lame human. LOTR for me as well. Helped me get through some dark times. And you, ring bearer, she said, turning to Frodo. I come to you last who are not last in my thoughts. For you I have prepared this. She held up a small crystal phial. It glittered as she moved it, and rays of white light sprang from her hand. In this phial, she said, is caught the light of Enorendil's star, set amid the waters of my fountain. It will shine still brighter when night is about you. May it be a light to you in dark places when all other lights go out. This is the end of the video. Thank you guys for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed watching this, you might as well watch these too.